Okay, so I've been learning piano for 4 years, and for the last 3 of them, I've been posting progress videos to show what I've learned. And although I think that was a good idea and I'm glad I did it, I'm not going to be doing it this year for what I think are pretty good reasons that are both evidence-based and applicable to spheres outside of piano. So in this video, we're going to talk about documenting your progress, when it's a good idea, when it isn't, and how to do it in a way that gets you closer to your goals quickly and sustainably. And at the end of the video, I'm going to explain the evidence-based practice routine that I'm currently using. Okay, so first, why am I not doing a video this year? I think this comes down to something I'm calling the YouTube effect. But to explain that, I think I need to explain why I wanted to make a progress video in the first place. And honestly, I just thought it would be cool. I'm in my 40s now, so I grew up in an era where you didn't take a video camera everywhere with you. So I've done a bunch of cool stuff that I just have absolutely zero footage of. So a couple of days after I started piano, I was like, oh, hey, maybe it would be nice to actually have some footage of this period so that I can look back on it when I'm hopefully better in a few months and see what I used to be like. And quite honestly, that worked great. I love having a visual record of how far I've come so that when I'm having a really bad day, I can look back on it and go, actually, you have made kind of a lot of progress. There are still days where I find myself going, have I really learned anything at all over these years? And being able to look back at how bad I used to be is actually very motivating. But the thing is, when you're starting out in pretty much anything, the path to progress is pretty clear. You're a beginner and you don't know how to do anything, so you start with the fundamentals, which on piano is stuff like scales and chords, and you can keep making incremental progress on them every single day, which pretty soon adds up to huge gains. And this also kind of worked in years 2 and 3. If you haven't seen those videos, I spent most of year 2 expanding my repertoire, trying to learn and play lots of varied pieces from different genres, most of them a bit harder than anything I played in year 1. And then in year 3, I moved on to some pretty difficult stuff like Maple Leaf Rag and Chopin's Nocturne, and I was pretty pleased with the progress that I made on those. But something I started to notice in year 3 was that sometimes worrying about those tougher pieces was actually starting to have a detrimental effect on my piano progress overall. There would be a day when I'd only have 20 minutes to practice, and instead of splitting that out into sight reading and technique, I would just grind on a piece that I really wanted to get on camera. And after I finished year 3, I felt this kind of massive sense of relief, but also a bit of anxiety about what I was going to do next. And this is what I'm calling the YouTube effect, which I think is probably going to feel fairly familiar to anybody who's watched quite a bit of YouTube. Because on YouTube, the temptation can be to do more of what you've done before. Whether that's making a bigger toothpaste volcano, or doing a bigger giveaway, or playing Moonlight Sonata 3, or whatever. And that's a lot of pressure. But I think it can also lead you to focusing on the wrong things, which is where part 2 comes in. Part 2, process versus performance. So in most other areas of my life, I'm a big believer in setting process goals over performance goals. So instead of having a performance goal of losing 2 kilos, I might set a process goal of eating 20 grams of protein at breakfast and drinking 2 liters of water a day, because those are the behaviors that are going to get me there. Or instead of having a newsletter goal of getting 6,000 subscribers, I might set the process goal of writing 1 newsletter consistently every week for 6 months. By the way, I do have a newsletter, it's totally free and I would love it if you signed up. There is a link in the description of this video. And this is also what I try to do with piano. But when I was thinking about getting good enough at specific pieces to perform them on camera, I ended up slipping back into performance goals, which I think are bad for a few reasons. Firstly, they're not really under your control. Events in your life can derail them, or they can just turn out to be harder than you thought they were going to be, and that can be really disheartening. Secondly, you feel like a failure until you accomplish them, instead of being able to feel like you've had a little win every day that you embrace the process that you've set out for yourself and done 10 minutes of practice or whatever. And finally, if your goals are purely performance-based, there's no clarity on how you're going to achieve them, which can stop you from taking action. With process goals, the path forward is always clear, which makes sitting down to practice quite a lot easier. So I'll share my current process goals in a minute, but first I think it's helpful to understand why I've structured them the way I have, which is where part 3 comes in. Part 3, the power of mixed practice. So obviously if you practice a piece all the time, it starts to feel really fluid and easy, but the practice can feel like a grind. And because you're not practicing anything else, it starts to feel like you're stalling elsewhere. But if you're practicing a bunch of different pieces, or sight reading new pieces every day, something interesting happens. The individual practice sessions can feel more difficult and less fluid, but you're actually gaining more from them. You're really working on the skills rather than just repeating the same rote patterns every day. So to give you a concrete example, when I was learning Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag, I practiced it almost every day for a couple of months, learning the entire first section, then the second section, and so on. and I definitely learned it, but it did take a long time. When I moved on to easy winners, which is about the same kind of technical difficulty, I changed my approach. I learned little blocks from each section, but I never spent that long on any of them in any given day. And then when I came to practice them again, I tried to remember them rather than using the music to jog my memory. And that felt really hard. A few times I just couldn't remember what I was supposed to be playing. But after I worked through the pieces and only used the sheets when I couldn't remember what I was supposed to do next, I ended up memorizing them and being able to learn them much faster. So I think there are really two things going on here. The first is that retrieval practice, where you're forcing yourself to pull information out of your brain rather than just like passively reviewing it, is actually a really productive form of practice. There are studies suggesting that the extra effort involved in deliberately recalling names, places, or facts helps us remember them a lot better over the long term than passively reviewing them. And then the second thing that's happening is that mixed practice, where you practice a lot of different skills over the course of your week, or even during each individual practice session, feels harder in the short term, but makes us better at those skills over the long term. So in maths, for instance, mixing up lots of different types of problem can make you better at working out which formula you use to solve each one. And in piano, playing lots of different pieces exposes you to a lot of different concepts and gives you more tools to play any piece at short notice. Basically, mixed practice might feel hard at times, but it's also less of a grind, more fun, and more effective at teaching you the stuff that is actually important to learn. And so that brings us to my current practice regime, which brings all of these ideas together to make sure that I'm improving over the long term and not just grinding on pieces that look cool on a progress video. So every day before I start work, I spend at least 10 minutes sight reading new pieces, because sight reading is like a skill I really want to work on, and it challenges me to not just read the music, but also like work out new fingerings in real time. After I'm warmed up, I also spend a few minutes working on scales, arpeggios, or technical exercises to make sure that I'm progressing, and I'm also kind of learning some musical theory at the same time. After that, I move on to the pieces that I'm working on, but I never really spend more than about 20 minutes working on one piece, and it's very rare that I'll spend more than 5 minutes working on any one section. It feels like tougher and less fluid over the short term, but in the long term, it's definitely working out for me. And finally, with special thanks to everyone who's pointed out that my posture and technique could use some improvement, I am going to be hiring a piano teacher. But if you're not at the hiring a teacher stage yet and you want to know more about how to teach yourself, I really recommend this video. Thanks for watching. Maybe in year 5, I'll be ready for another video.